what I like to see. That's what I like to see.
Here we go! Yeah, baby!
Go on. Yeah.
Watch out!
That was me, 17 years ago, when I entered the world of foam fighting. From the outside looking in, a person could probably just see a bunch of nerds that made makeshift weapons out of pool noodles, PVC piping, and duct tape in the basement of their parents' home. So they can go to a local park, pretend to be an anime character or a Jedi Knight from the Star Wars films. But that is why I am doing this video, to kind of put a spotlight on the foam fighting world in general, to show that it is a lot more than just pretending to be one of your favorite characters from movies, video games, or anime series. To understand the world of foam fighting, we should start at the beginning. In the 1970s, tabletop games like Dungeons & Dragons were just starting to become popular, and a group of friends wanted to make a game that they can actually do in real life. And as they were big fans of the Lord of the Rings series, they came up with the game called Dagahir, which in the Elvish language of Middle-earth means Battle Lord. Dagahir might have started the foam fighting community, but over the years, many more games have been created. There are likely hundreds of different foam fighting organizations in this country in the different regions, but I want to mention the other two big ones that are around. The first one is AmpGuard, and it was created in 1983 in Texas. They are a little bit more into the role-playing aspect of foam fighting, but still have some foam fighting combat in the game. And the next one is Bellegarde, which was made in the early 2000s, and it was sort of a breakaway from the Dagahir due to different ways they wanted to go about changing or adding to foam fighting. And I have said foam fighting is different from Larps. I mean, Larp is a game, but is also part of foam fighting. But a LARPing game focuses more on the stories and the characters, and most of the time, physical combat is minimal. They have class-based fighters or characters that have special abilities, equipment, spells that they can use in combat. And in foam fighting organizations, they're less focused on the stories and abilities and focus more into physical combat. Some of the foam fighting games do have some sort of classes, but for the most part, there's no classes, and they just more physically active in these games. Both styles of foam fighting are fun and exciting, which brings all types of people to join in the community. Now a foam fighting organization is less focused on the story and the character and more physical combat heavy. And there are usually no classes or different types of fighters in the organization to keep it more streamlined. And they work on techniques and different sword fighting schools from European to Eastern Asian to African. All sorts of different martial arts are more taught and used in these games. Now, don't get me wrong. Both games are fun and exciting and appeals to the broad array of people to be part of this community. So I'm going to have members of Thaliondor, a foam fighting game found in Oclala, Florida, to explain more in depth what the difference between a LARP and a foam fighting game is. And I just don't want you to hear my voice on talking about foam fighting, so I'm going to have Gorg the Foamsmith, a respected member in almost every single foam fighting game out there, speak on the fun and exciting world of foam fighting. And as well as I will have two chapter leaders also talk about their games and what foam fighting means to them.
You may have stumbled across this channel or page in some capacity and wondered to yourself, what am I even looking at? Well, I'm here to tell you. Thaliondor is a Larp, or live-action roleplay game, but more specifically, a full-contact, sufficient-force foam fighting game with minor roleplay elements. Now, okay, that's a lot of mumbo-jumbo, you might be telling yourself, and you're right. Let's break it down keyword by keyword. Larp is a blanket term for anything that you do live and are playing a role. Like training at a workplace, or like Airsoft. Airsoft is a LARP, but don't tell them I said that. Some escape rooms even have you LARPing, you just don't realize that you're doing it. Full contact means that we really get in there. There's grappling, checking, weapon manipulation, and the whole shebang-a-bang. We really get after it. Sufficient force means that strikes are done sufficiently. You can't just tap someone with your weapon for the shot to count, it has to be a substantial hit. But at the same time, you don't have to full-on home run bat someone either. We say around 60 to 70% of your strength should be fine. Foam fighting is the term used for boffer games, meaning that the swords are large, bulky, and padded for sufficient strikes without the need for armor or protective gear. Minor roleplay elements. Thaliondor has more roleplay elements than, say, Airsoft, as you can play one of 4 classes, and each class has magic and abilities that they can use. But in Thaliondor's case, these magic and abilities are very grounded in reality and don't take much imagination to play with. The red fabric-covered tennis ball that's being hurled at you is a fireball, and if you don't get hit by it, you don't get burned. That kind of stuff. And there you have it. Now you know what Thaliondor is. The short of it is, we're just a bunch of nerds that hit each other with sticks.
Foam fighting. What is something that is like a stigma? How will you describe it in your own words? I know you're high up in everything.
I would say I'm known. I don't know about high up, but I'm known, so I get that. I've been playing since 2010, late 2010. I was really big into Airsoft before.
Oh,
and
okay.
I think the stigma is it looks silly to people who haven't tried it, but so does paintball and Airsoft and any other kind of game like that. I think that through social media and stuff, it's becoming like more of a thing that people are willing to try, I guess you could say. But the stigma, I would say, is that, I don't know, a bunch of nerds that, like, never grew up, which, I don't know. It's hard to say what I guess my stigma with it before I played was that they're not really fighting, why are they doing that? And it's like, well, that's kind of the point. Like, we are fighting, but we're not trying to hurt each other. I think the stigma is people try and think that we're trying to copy, like, a martial art, which that's not really what it's about at all. More of a game, more of a, I don't know, tackle football, paintball, Airsoft, like that kind of combat-oriented simulation. Yeah. We're not trying to kill anybody.
Do you know anything about the history of like how foam fighting or LARPing, or because I think you mainly fight Daggahir. Maybe you can explain Daggahir a little bit better.
So in the past few years, I've actually swapped to more Bellegarth. And we were Bellegarth when we first started, because that's what was closest to us. Winter War was Bellegarth at the time, and the closest other events were Tennessee. And then it became where Daggahir kind of took over a few spots down here, so we played that. And now it's back to Bellegarth. Now the games are relatively similar. Like, I could go play both and only have to change a little bit about what to remember on the field for certain rules, or like how to build certain things. But yeah, we're primarily Bellegarth now.
What you expect out of practice?
Okay, so yeah, now that we're Bellegarth, what I like about it is the combat is what you would call sufficient force. And so sufficient force means you have to hit me with enough, like, gusto to where, like, you know, a good solid thwack rather than like a glancing shot, or where some more games that focus more on the role play of it would take anything that kind of touches you.
Mm-hmm.
I like that because it is a little bit more physical, and you know, it ramps up the intensity of the combat and of the hitting a little bit. What I expect at a practice, or what I like to see at a practice, is, you know, a lot of people just show up, fight for a couple hours, go home, which is great, but I think that community is built more so off the field than on. And so if you care about the people that you're going to practice with and have some sort of relationship with them, your practices end up lasting longer and having more attention. And so I preach lunch afterwards, build days. You know, if a bunch of you play similar games, get a Discord. We have a group chat that a guy he's been here a couple years now, but he's really stepped up to taking over a much larger leadership role. His name's Cord. He's been playing the game for a long time. So he's got unit or realm trials. Like, you can get a belt flag by your attendance, but if you want the hand sewn embroidered belt flag, you have to do a trial, and everyone's pretty into that. It's basically just single blue bridge.
Oh, wow.
1v1. Yeah, single blue bridge, 1v1, everyone uses single blue. And that's good because single blue is always fundamentals. So it's like self-serving and like has multiple purposes. Like, yeah, that guy or girl is going for their belt flag, but it gets everyone to fight each other 1v1 single blue. And so, like, there's a lot of cool things like that. Easy game types where someone who plays like an online game could already have familiarity with it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
Like capture the flag, or kill the king, or kill your killer, 3 to a tree. There's like a bunch of easy games you can run.
All these games are fun.
Oh yeah, and then having a class every now and again, and it doesn't have to be super deep, because like I said, it's the realm level. There's always going to be someone new. And there's always reason to brush up on your own basics, you know what I mean?
Maybe you can also go a little deeper into what is like a difference between like a foam fighting of what we do and like a more of a LARP heavy games that are out there.
Sure, I haven't played very many, so I have to go on what people have told me. But there's crossover on both, right? So
yeah.
You have your combat, you have your off-field type arts and sciences, or like other things like night parties or get-togethers, and then you have your story, your continuity, your role play, your character, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And where Belagarth focuses more on the on-field combat, we are starting, it has been started, but it's starting to get more widespread, integrating those other things as well, in order to reach other people. But on face value, Belagarth focuses more on the combat, the outcome, like actual physical and tactic combat, whereas some other LARPs focus more on the story being told, and your character attributes are like what your character can do within the game is based on the stats that you have, things like that. Some are like that. Some are class-based, where, like, if you play a specific class, you can use certain weapons or have certain spells, whereas others would have things that are different and would counteract those. And so I think that's where Belagarth stands, is more of the, like, just, as far as the game itself goes, more of straight combat. My character is a druid who can turn into a bear and is on the hunt for a lost holy grail or whatever.
You, my guest that's going to be speaking on behalf of the whole organization is Dylan over here. So what is Watts about?
First off, hi, I'm Dylan, game name Isaiah. For those who don't know, game names are a little way that we just interact with each other and just be able to identify each other while role-playing into the game, which goes into Watts, which Watts is a foam fighting game. It stands for Way of the Sword. It's just a fun place to go to kind of just let off some steam, have some fun, meet some new people. That's what I feel it is.
Now, I know you personally. You've been doing this about 5 or 6 years.
Yeah.
What made you want to get into foam fighting?
Well, I mean, honestly, I've always been a nerd, collecting like wooden swords or sword-shaped sticks and putting them on the wall, that kind of stuff. So it's kind of always just been a thing for me. And I was in high school, and I connected with this great teacher. His name is Wayne Calais. He's actually the one that runs the group, as you know. And, he got me into, like, Dungeons and Dragons and stuff like that. And then just from there, whenever I became the minimum age to join, which is 16, he invited me out here, and the rest is history.
Now, we're talking about foam fighting. How did you
want to like put it out there because it still has like a bad rep. It's like we're LARPers and we're like nerds running around, and you know we can't like take a hit or whatever. We start crying if the rules are off. So there's just like a stigma about this LARPing and foam fighting in general. How can you like broaden just the crowd?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, that's always the thing, because you know we're kind of held back by the thing of like, oh, like role models or the Monty Python is like, 'tis but a scratch to every single time you get hit. But the way that I like to describe it is like, if you like exercise, it is kind of no different than the gym, except it's just like it's collaborative. There's some like rivalry going on. It's just a place to not only work on yourself physically, but just get around a good community.
Yeah, and that's what I liked about it. Do you consider like a lot of these members of your clan and the group of Oni Tetsukai no Oni? Sorry, I want to make sure I get the name right. Do you consider them like more of like a brotherhood, like your friends and people you hang out with, not just foam fighting, but outside?
No, like honestly, like the people here have just become family. You know, like I've known Wayne for 5+ years, you as well. And there's a lot of people that I've just, bonded with and formed a great relationship to where, it's just like if I need something, I'm there for them. If they need something, I'm there for.
Yeah, and that's what I remember in the early parts of me starting my fighting career 17 years ago, is that it was a brotherhood. We hung out outside of fighting and, sometimes we were dating members of the group and all that stuff, but it felt like it changed for me over it. But what do you think when the other guys take it real serious, some of the units you take? Is that something you guys like to do, or how's your approach to this game?
Well, there's always that level, right? You got the people that are just kind of brushing into it, trying it for the first time, and then there's the ones that take it way too seriously. There's always that extreme in just about any hobby, and just like in any other hobby, those people can kind of ruin the game for others. And I feel like it's okay to be serious about it, but don't be like serious.
don't be saying like don't make it like your whole life.
Yeah. Don't. It's just a game. In the end. That's kind of what I mean.
And have you ever like taken it more serious than it just being a game? Because I know I have in the past where I was a more serious fighter, and now over the years I've just kind of chilled out, and I'm loving it more than I did. I mean, I loved it back then when I was in my late teens, early 20s, but now it's just a game and I have fun with it more.
Yeah. Well, I'm kind of always the guy who I don't really like drama, so I don't want to put myself in situations where drama can potentially exist. So I prefer to keep it a hobby. It's something I do for fun. Why am I going to stress about it?
Yeah. And what would you say to people that maybe want to try this for the first time?
Go for it. We're always looking for new people. If you want some down-to-earth people that you can hang out with and talk about just about anything, we're here. And then plus on top of that, like I was saying before, this is a good place to work on yourself, improve yourself either like physically or just emotionally. Like we have some of our people, one of our members, John, when he came to us, he was kind of still working on interacting with people, wasn't, exactly the most sociable. Like he was there, but he was kind of to himself, and just over time, like you've seen him, like he's cool, outgoing, dude. He's friendly, he's like working on trying to, better himself, learning new skills, and it's done great for him, and it's done great for me too.
Now, we'll keep this simple and quick.
Sorry.
What is one of your you're fine in this interview. What is your favorite memory you have so far in this foam fighting path that you've been on playing in this game?
Well, I can say two. One, life-wise. One, the actual interaction.
Yeah, let's start with life-wise. It's more than everything,
Yeah, well, I mean, I met my girlfriend here. She came out. She was enjoying it. We started talking, and now me and her have a place together, so.
Wow. That's awesome. Beautiful things happening. Now, what about just, like, fighting?
Well, okay, so it was out in one of our day battles, which is basically a large foam fighting battle, and, someone shot an arrow, and I bent backwards, and I literally could feel the arrow scrape across the bottom of my teeth. So that was probably the most badass moment that I can say that I've had in this game.
Well, all right. Thank you so much for giving me a little time. It's simple. But what can you say that what a difference between Way the Sword is or Watch with the other foam fighting organizations that you fought with or part of? What makes this different than the other organizations out there?
Two things: rules, and then because of rules, the culture.
Okay, that's why you are different, but also the same.
Well, the games having different rules changes it, but those rules end up defining what the culture is like in the game.
Gotcha. Well, thank you for your time, man.
No problem.
All right. How would you tell people to get interested in foam fighting and want them at least check it out?
Yeah, if anyone was interested in trying our game in particular, the easiest way would be to go to hearthlightgame.org, and there's actually a section there where you can find the closest chapter to you and contact them and see if they have a practice. We also have a Discord that you can get on and ask about if you have any practices near you or anything like that. And if you don't, you can either see about starting one if you're interested, or you can see where the nearest event to you is, which we have weekend-long events, sometimes a little bit longer, where people come together and camp for a weekend, and there's lots of battling with dozens to 100 people at a time. Many other activities in arts and science and other things like that for people to be interested in. And yeah, that would probably be the best way.
Now, what happens if someone necessarily wants to be part of a group but doesn't want to fight as much? I do know there's some groups like to incorporate non-combat style stuff too. So maybe you can tell people about that as well.
Yeah. All of our groups, all of our chapters, and all of our events are required to have activities that are not combat based, and these take the form in a myriad of things. Everything from competitions of like crafting, and those categories can vary wildly, from like cooking to camp things to just an art project in general that's sort of themed in the medieval sense or medieval fantasy. We ourselves locally here have at least one craft day or arts and science day a month where we get together, and instead of a practice we do that and help each other craft and give advice to each other and stuff like that. We also sometimes have feasts and things of that nature. So there's also lots of role-play events for people that want to do things like that, where it's sort of set up scenarios like monster hunts. That's like a more RP-focused combat scenario that tends to take place at night at certain events. And there's usually certain people acting as monsters in the woods, and you have to try to fight them in some way, shape, or form. And they usually have special powers or something like that. That's like one example that is combat with RP, but there's also plenty of people running their own role-play stuff that's completely not combat-based. For instance, there's a group that are called the Gnomes, and they are gnomes. They dress as gnomes, and they like to go around and give people gnome mail, which is usually filled with worms, and they're fake worms in this case, but they're worms, and you can sometimes trade those in to certain people for goods and trinkets and stuff like that.
That's really cool.
If you earn the favor of the gnomes, you can get little trinkets potentially, or you just have a big envelope full of worms, which is always a possibility.
That's funny. Just because this is more of a fun question, what was the biggest battlefield you've been on with people?
The largest battlefield that I've ever been on was 1,000. It must have been at least 1,000. It might have been 1,200. That was probably about 7 years ago. That event no longer exists, but that was like its 40th anniversary. It was its 30th or 40th anniversary, I can't remember. And yeah, there was 1,000 to 1,200 people on the field. Probably it was a 500 to 600 two-team smash into each other sort of thing. Actually, no, sorry. It was 3 teams. One was just much smaller than the other 2. So it was probably like 200, 500, 500 or something like that.
That's...
And that was insane. But that event usually had fields of 600 to 1,200. Our events are smaller than that, but honestly, other than the shock value of having so many people pretend armed around you and fighting and all the noises of that, it doesn't really matter that much once you start getting into the multiple dozens of fighters on each team, because there's only so many people that can be around you at one time for it to really matter in terms of you fighting. But yeah, that's the biggest that it's ever gotten for me.
Oh, it must have been so much fun. You got the adrenaline going, and you just, oh man.
Oh yeah, no, there's arrows flying everywhere. There's that you can't even keep track of over your head and around you. There's tons of pole arms and spears and everything. There's slashes going everywhere. It's a miracle, no matter almost how skilled you are, to survive in those scenarios.
You've been there. Now, what are kind of some of the weapons that are used?
So we have a large variety of weapons. Pretty much anything. There is a, in terms of the weapons we use, it's a wide variety. There's only a few certain kinds of weapons that are kind of explicitly banned because of the nature of their safety. But for the most part, anything that you can make with a hardcore and foam that follows the, or at least not necessarily foam, but is padded and passes the safety standards, is something that you can use, and as long as it's period appropriate. For the most part, we use swords, clubs, axes, shields, bows, spears, glaives, pole axes, things of like that nature. Those are the most common things that you see out in the field. But every once in a while, you see some weirdo with a bow staff, or daggers and stuff like that. But large variety that I'm not even naming. It's not an exhaustive list for sure.
Well, thank you for your time, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely, no problem.
So as you can see, there's more to foam fighting than just the fighting part. I still to this day have friends that I met back 18 plus years ago when I first started, and they are some of my closest friends. I've also met my wife through foam fighting, and I am accepted and welcomed at so many places. I feel like being part of the foam fighting organization, you can be welcomed almost anywhere at any time in this country. And that is why I wanted to put a spotlight on foam fighting in general, because it is more than just a sport. It is almost like a lifestyle. And there's just so many great people and interesting things that you can do with this sport. And that is why I made this video. I hope you like it. I want to thank all the people that helped me do it. That is Dexter from Heart Life here in Portland, Maine, in my home state. The Thaliondor in Oclala, Florida. My friends in Tampa, the part of the Tetsukai no One. And I want to give a big shout out to Gorg the Foamsmith to allow me to have his words and join me to speak on his experiences, as he is a very well-respected man in the foam fighting community. All the videos that you see me using, I'll have linked to their YouTube page. There's a lot of great fighting that goes on. The camera work and the filming of all the different fights are amazing, so I suggest you guys check it out if you watch this video. Thank you so much for allowing me to give you this little documentary, or I should say just a video on looking at foam fighting in a different lens. Thank you very much.